Hey, good morning and welcome to Crosstalk Podcast. We're starting a little late because we were chit chatting and we lost track of time. So I apologize for being late. If you're watching live, if you're watching on record, we're glad you're watching and thank you so much for being with us at Eatonton First United Methodist Church for the Crosstalk Podcast for June the 13th? Is it June 13th? Is the high today is going to be we're told a chilly 100 degrees in Eatonton, Georgia. So with a heat index of something like 108. So if we look a little warm to you, that's probably why, because we walked into a building that was a little warm when we got here. But we're glad to be here. It's summertime, and we were just talking about youth and children. And earlier this morning, we were talking about young adults. I want to say first off, though, we're gonna talk a little bit about the under, I guess, 40. I'm 45, or I'll be 45 in September. So the under 45 set, or maybe under 50 set of the church, and we want to talk about young adults and children and youth. But I want to say that Brian, who is now Rev Bev, Brian is going to be. He's not smiling at me, by the way. Reverend Beveridge is going to be going in 3 weeks to serve alongside the fine folks at Rutledge First United Methodist Church, Rutledge United Methodist Church, and so just down the road from us. And so we're going to be saying goodbye to him, and so in some ways this is kind of like the start of a goodbye. Not that he'll be with us, and maybe he'll pop in for podcasts down the road. Maybe we can cajole him to come over to Eatonton a little bit, but or maybe we'll just Skype with him on a podcast. I don't know. But we want to make sure we say thanks to him. I say thanks to him, and just know that today and next week will be our last 2 podcasts with Brian, and we'll probably take a couple of weeks off just to reset and try to figure out how we go forward. I mean, we got to figure out how to do this without Brian. So Brian is our AV guy, and he's been doing this for us. He kind of set this whole thing up. So we're gonna try to adjust and figure that out. But it's gonna be a long goodbye for Brian. But it's not. It's really more of a see you later. So on to our talk. We want to talk about young adults and children and youth. And one thing I would say that if anybody who is participating in church in 2022 in America would have to admit that it's the toughest demographic to engage. It's the toughest one to weave into the church. Maybe not. Maybe I've heard some denominations are doing well with young adults. But I'm kind of in a bubble in that I am only United Methodist, so I don't see a lot of the other stuff. So what do you think? What is the state of young adults in the church, the organized church, or maybe just the Church of Jesus Christ in America in 2022?
They have connections in a few other denominations, and they're having the same problem we are. We're pulling in young adults. The non-denominationals are the ones that are actually doing the best of pulling people in. And a lot of the younger people are saying that they want more spirituality and less tradition and like a hardcoreness, and they want more of something they can take home at the end of the week instead of just the same sermon that they hear every 3 years.
Mm-hmm. It's complicated. Is a good start. It's a complicated thing. I don't have the answer to it, and I know that a lot of people look around. I'll tell you my feel as a pastor for 15 years. I feel and being 44, about to be 45. My feel is, at least as a Methodist, is that the things that we do as Methodists have caused some dis-ease amongst young adults. One has to be, and I think our congregation has had this problem, is consistency. So as a pastor who's itinerant, when pastors come and go, I think that is one piece of the problem, is that it's young adult or young families come and engage, say, a pastor, and then if the pastor leaves in 4 or 5 years, that makes it difficult for the family to jump in. Another piece is there's our country has become very transient. We move a lot, and there are people who don't move a lot, but you've got a lot of cross pollination with a lot of deep rooted people. So, like you're from Monticello, you still have deep roots there. I'm from Canton, Georgia. I have deep roots in Canton. You're from Eatonton. You have deep roots in Eatonton. But when I come from Canton into Eatonton, I experience Eatonton from a perspective of being from Canton, and but now Monticello's closer in. But when you move to a new town, it's like there's new families, there's old existing stories and old existing realities and good things, bad things, bland things, but it's hard to engage the existing church. And so being in Eatonton, we're at United Methodist Church. We're an existing church. This congregation's been here since 1827, I think, and then it was its own building in 1857. So 30 years later,
1854, I think.
57.
57. So you've got, but it's an old church, old wineskin, and you've got you've got a lot of cross pollination. So pastors coming and going, cross pollination, and then the society. For me, this is just my opinion. The society is definitely giving other things for kids or families to do, like sports. Summer, like just fall baseball, football in the fall baseball, basketball in the winter, girls and boys basketball, softball all year round, soccer all year round, traveling here and there. I've got a nephew that does all that He's playing basketball right now, even though he's playing baseball right now. It's like he has like 2 sports, so he's got 5 or 6 practices a week and 2 or 3 games a week.
Yeah.
So people are exhausted on Sunday, and there's lack of depth in the communities because people are moving. Pastors coming and going, so it's hard to connect in with the pastor. And then there's just 10 other things going on.
Well, from somebody who is it one of the older members, whatever. I mean, you talk about how old you are, and I'm thinking that's the age of my children. So I look at my 3 children. My 3 biological children, they fall in the lost generation. They really do. Joseph being the youngest and Jessica being the oldest, which is about your age. And I look at them, and of my 3, 2 of the 3 are very active in a church. 1 goes hither and yon. But why do they do it? Well, I think a lot of it is my generation's fault. I take part of the responsibility for my generation. My generation did not take time to teach their children the importance of church. They were not good mentors. I asked my children, why do you go to church? Or what do you remember? And they would tell you, it was real funny. One time we were talking about what would happen when I passed on, what they would want, all this kind of stuff. And all 3 of them spoke up and said, the only thing we will fight over, Dad, is your Bible. And I said, why? I said, because you would have it every Sunday, was well used, and also it made a good paddle. It did. I disciplined with the word of the Lord. I mean, but then unfortunately what happened, we're afraid the Bible got misplaced and we can't find it. But anyway, that in itself, they watch their parents pray, they watch their parents go to church, they watch their parents in times of need turn to God. A lot of my generation didn't do that. And I think that age group, why go to church? What's the purpose of it?
Right.
Now, non-denominational, the contemporary has picked up this generation because they're giving them what these children and their children are used to. It's fast moving, it's fast paced, a lot of videos, it's very visual,
good sound,
and good
loud.
Sound, loud, and
Colors, lights.
that's what they want.
There's they usually don't have windows because
Everything's usually black.
Everything's kind of like a theater.
When we went to spring retreat, they had it was very traditional chapel at Glisson, but it was just that flashing lights and all of that, and very loud and vibrant, and that's what they want. And a lot of churches, my generation, are saying, "Oh no,
yeah,
Well, see, a lot of people think when you say contemporary, you have to have what they per se contemporary music. That's not always the case. I mean, you can take regular hymns and play it in a different manner to where it's actually more attractive. Because a lot of younger generations, when they see organ, they think funeral. I mean, literally, that's what they think because that's what they associate with that or a Catholic church.
Well, the in America, it's just a big societal issue. But like I think about the Apostles' Creed, which I think very similarly, or in the same vein about the Pledge of Allegiance, or I think about just like I think about the Bible, and I think about when I think about the Bible, it's the Bible, and I think about the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence, and then the Constitution. I think that's like foundational stuff.
That's right.
But I'd say the under 50 generation probably hasn't, as a society, hasn't really engaged the Bible, hasn't really been taught the Bible, it's similar to the Constitution or what is liberty and these sorts of things in an American sense. But there's no, there's I sense a disconnect, and I'm sort of sitting on I got 1 foot on one side of the fence and one side on the other. There's a disconnect between I perceive between the orthodoxy of the church or what is right in belief, and what is right, what we think of as orthopraxy, or what is right in practice. So how do we make sure that that the church goes forward with a generation that's not really interested or is not somehow ready to engage?
We take
the Bible.
We take the youth and the children we have and do the best job we can with them. For example, last week we finished Bible school, 35 to 40 kids every night. And one thing you did was so good, we tried the power of prayer. Yeah. Do you realize a lot of youth go many days and never say a blessing? I mean, we tried to teach them God is great, God is good. Kids there never heard it.
Isn't that wild?
It's to my generation.
Well, for me personally,
I mean, that is just. I thought, what?
Right.
And I used to be, when we started this. I don't know when we started at my house. Bryce now will soon be 18, maybe because he was the oldest grandchild there. So he starts the blessing, and I said, "Say anything you want." So guess what he came out with? God is great, God. So now that is our blessing, but we all say it with him.
Yeah.
These kids have never heard that.
It's true. It's true. We've got and it's taken us probably 20 or 30 years and 2 generations to get to this point. And might I add, just to be biblical, this happened in the Bible. Remember Ezra, when Ezra and Nehemiah came back from Babylon.
That's right.
Ezra walked into the old temple, basically the ruins of the old temple, and with Nehemiah, and they came in there having to build a wall and figure out rebuild the temple, and Ezra goes, I forget where in the book of Ezra it is, but he basically goes in and finds the scrolls, reads them to the people, and they're just shocked. Like, I can't believe,
where did that come from?
I can't believe this is what God has said to our people. And so this has happened over. We're in a. Hopefully, I pray we're in a lull. If this was a curve of knowledge, like that over time our knowledge has sort of deteriorated, our societal knowledge of God, and maybe the revival is on its way to bring us back.
Well, another thing too is if we look at how many denominations we have, that also confuses kids that have never been in any kind of church, because they're like, well, they believe this, and this. It's almost the same thing you believe, but there's one difference. Why are y'all not together?
Right.
And each denomination fights with each other on the bigger scheme of everything over one small thing in doctrine, instead of joining together to say, look, we all believe the basic same core beliefs. You know, God the Father, God the Son, great. You know, you're saved by grace through faith. We don't get joined together to say that. We say, well, the Baptists say, well, we only don't.
And the Methodists say we sprinkle.
We sprinkle, immerse.
That used to be a big issue. Now it's like, it's not a big issue because we're all so desperate to just see God.
There's still some churches, though, that are hardcore in that tradition, that they're like, we're not going to veer from that. That's the only thing we'll do, But here's the other thing. They actually christen and dedicate. What's the difference of christening and dedication in their church? When they say the same liturgy we do with baptism.
Well, they wouldn't put water on that baby's head.
They do in some churches.
Well, that would be baptism.
But they consider it christening or dedication.
Well, when I left church Sunday, the radio was on, and I may have been Union Point. Anyway, it's 1309 to listen to. And the guy was, I guess they had a christening, baptism. And he said, this is one of the most profound things we do as parents. What you're saying is you are bringing this baby to church and you're saying, thank you, God, for entrusting this baby with me. I thought, that is right there's why we had our children christened.
Right.
And then when they turned 12 or 14, they joined the church and were baptized.
Right.
They say,
I would say dedicated.
yeah, whatever the word is. I could care less. But
I know, I'm a Methodist.
But that's right. And see, a lot of parents don't do that. A lot of my generation, they don't think their blessings come from God. It comes from them. And they pass this right on to their children.
That's because we're taught me.
That's a human.
It's me,
that's the
mine,
human
me,
feeling.
mine, me. What can I get?
And I think therein is, if you really want to boil down and get to the core of the issue of our society, and our failure for the Generation X and those that come after Generation X is Generation Y, Millennials, and I guess Z is the one that's coming up now. Is XYZ. The identity we have succumbed in the church, no matter what denomination we are. We have succumbed to identity politics and identity emphasis. So it's all about what I am. I mean,
yeah, we
were at annual conference and members of the annual conference, some of them were identifying themselves from their preferred pronouns, which it's a real it's a place where we really try to tick people off. It's either like you're either with us or you're against us. It's one more place to divide us. But when people begin to identify their own, and I understand that there are people that have issues on all those questions. But as a society, when we begin to identify ourselves, and you cannot identify me except for how I prefer to be identified. That's when it becomes like, well, you could just remove the pronoun question and say, I identify myself as a white man, or I identify myself as a 45-year-old, or I identify myself as educated, or I identify myself as Christian or Protestant or Methodist, and suddenly we're splitting every one of ourselves apart rather than what is I think it's Philippians 3:5. Paul says, he didn't say it quite like this, but I'll paraphrase. I, a Jew, a rabbi, one of the best rabbis, trained by one of the very smartest and brightest rabbis. He meant Gamaliel, who was like the Albert Einstein of his moment. All these things, me. And he says, I consider all of that, and I'm going to use it in a polite way, dog squeeze. I consider all of that dog squeeze, because that's like the literal translation of what he says. He doesn't. Right. We always say loss. We count it as loss, but Paul meant for it to be like a cuss word.
Yeah.
He says, I consider it all of that identification stuff that I just gave you, nothing compared to that I am in Christ. And so we as a society,
that's what we've lost.
Amen. And we have lost our willingness to surrender to Christ.
That's right.
And if you're going to really truly be baptized, you are. I heard someone much wiser than me say, talking about the ancient Christians, the first thing that they did, and not just ancient, but even now, Orthodox Christians, the first thing they do is force. Like I think it was recently that was happening in, I think it was India. I forget who told me this, but that the first thing, if you're going to be a Christian in India, first thing you have to do is prepare for your baptism. And it can't be a baptism in the back of the church. They do it out in the square so that everybody of all the other faiths, all the other sort of ideas, whether it be Hinduism or Sikhism or Islam or whatever you are, whatever the people of the streets see, they want to make sure that if you truly want to be a Christian, you are giving your life to Christ, and you do it publicly so that there's no questions to the church or the world where you stand, and we have lost that in our Western society.
We have.
Well, the other thing we lost too is we consider the water baptism almost more important than the spiritual baptism. If you look
Come
at
on.
Ephesians 4, it says one faith, one baptism, one Christ.
Yep.
It doesn't say you can get baptized by Joe Blow down the street and you're saved. No, you're saved by the grace and faith in Christ. There's one faith, one baptism, one Christ, one, and it pretty much means one church.
So to that sense, like, or what just to add to that, our society, our American society, has seen so many moral failures of like these cult of personality preachers, like
That's
Jimmy
right.
Swaggart, or what's his name? That was Oral Roberts. He sort of, cried for more money on television, and Jimmy Swaggart had affairs, hired prostitutes, and it all kind of came out, and our parents were about my age when this all happened, and so there was just a crisis of institution. In our Methodist church, we've had the same sort of crises because we can't seem to agree on how to follow Christ and to interpret the scriptures. We're looking at it with a divergent sense of what it is and how to interpret it. And so all of these things have emerged at one point, and now we have there's a selfish generation who's seen a selfish church act selfishly, and we all are. And then of course, like I said, pastors come and go, and so there's a credibility loss. We've lost credibility. Some of the churches that actually still have credibility often have pastors who've been there for a long time.
Well, it's rough.
Credible pastors.
It is rough. This generation, the lost generation, they come to church. Are we giving them something that they can take with them when they leave service? Case in point, my Sunday school class, which has no printed curriculum, we're taking the Bible book by book. We're in Acts 2 this Sunday. We read it and we talk about it. And you would not believe what we have discussed in there. And I've had a lot of the members will text me later on and say, this really helped me a lot. That's what we're missing. I mean, when they go to church service or to services, are we giving them, this generation, what they need? Do we know what it's like to live in their life? I don't.
Sure.
Because in my opinion, their life, 35 to whatever, was mine. But when we were 35, there was no social media. We paid $4,000 for our first Apple computer,
Sure.
which was huge.
Understood.
Yeah. And we lived in the country. We didn't have air conditioning for a long time. I swore I'd never have a color TV. Boy, that went out the window
We
real
got
fast.
cable when I was in like 10th grade.
See, there was no
Yeah.
cable,
There was no cable in the country.
and nobody remembers.
Well, see, I had an MTV in South Park.
See? And so, do we know what these generation? What are they dealing with? What type of life?
A lot of us don't know.
We don't know.
A lot of us don't know, and a lot of us don't have a clue of what they're watching, what they're doing. YouTube has become, ironically, we're on YouTube. YouTube has become the media. It's
And how does this generation deal with raising their children? I hear a lot of parents, especially having worked in school education, my child is so disrespectful to me.
There's a divergence of economics too. I worked from home yesterday to get my. I had several things I had to do, but I was trying to get my sermons prepared, and I did. I got them prepared to Christmas, but not prepared, but planned. And I was at lunch hour. I had a peanut butter toast, and I sat there and looked at an advertisement for a Grand Wagoneer, and it said starting price $88,000.
Oh, yeah.
Now I know Grand Wagoneers were fancy when I was a kid, but they weren't $88,000. They might have been $30,000. But how? And I just realized, like I thought I was a little bit more middle class than that, but I guess I'm not. But you can't. There are people buying cars, a lot of people buying cars that are over $50,000, and there's an entire, I'd say, majority of people who can't. And most of us can't afford that, so there's a divergent
But here's how they do it.
economics.
They buy it on credit. They pay on it for a little while. Then they trade it back in, and they buy another car on credit.
You never
They
get out.
trade it in. They never get out of that cycle.
You take what you
So you're
sell
saying
and put
most
it,
people don't have the sense to write a $90,000 check.
Right.
or you have a loan and you go to the bank and say, and it's
But I
Well,
mean,
I
a house,
get my hair
it's
cut.
it's funny money.
that's half a house to me.
You hear me?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
funny money. It's you never see the real money. You just keep and you pay. Well, that's the reason why we're leasing the car we've got now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Because
I was
for
getting
3
my
years.
hair cut, and this guy was on the phone with this guy, and he used to do financial stuff before he started cutting hair. He got out of that because the financial world was going so crazy.
That's interesting.
Well, he said it's going so crazy. People were not doing anything with the money they should have been doing. They wanted to get rich, but they didn't want to actually invest. This kid was 18 years old. He wanted to go take out a $100 and something thousand loan for a Bentley.
A car
A Bentley, yes, a used Bentley.
that you could wrap around a
On
tree.
what collateral?
and the guy's like, "Well, what you gonna put down on it?"
Yeah.
Nothing.
He's like, "Do you own a house? No. Do you rent a house? No.
Live with my
You live with
folks.
mama?
Yeah.
You have a job?
No.
Is your mom
How you gonna
gonna
pay for it?
Is your mom going to co-sign it?
Well, and because I tell you, Brian, we argue this at our house. A lot of them know anything but swipe. Pull out that card and
Well,
swipe.
that's what they're trained. When I grew up, we actually were, we were taught how to count money. Kids nowadays don't even know how to count money. They don't know what half the money is.
Well, you would be surprised how many, we saw this yesterday, how many young people don't ever handle cash. They handle a credit card. Put it on a credit card and you worry about it later. And you build it up so much, you don't ever really pay it off. It's that whole business. So I'm sitting in church. Here I am. I have 2 children maybe, and they're up maybe 12 or 8 or whatever. I'm looking at them. The 12-year-old wants to be a 15 or 18-year-old, and and I'm sitting there listening to this minister jaw about something that doesn't mean anything to my life.
Right.
So why should I come back in here?
Right.
And see, that's what we're missing. What causes you to come to church? You laugh at me all the time, but I'm telling you, it's the upper left-hand corner of the historic sanctuary. I check into God every Sunday morning.
So thinking about messaging from church messaging, what should the church be? How can the church be relevant to the people who aren't coming?
Figure out what is relevant. What do I need to address? For example, you spoke on chaos. I had somebody to call me and say, he was talking to me. That's what I'm dealing with. Now that's better than what did some prophet that's been dead 1,000 years. May have been very important, but I could care less.
History lesson. You don't need a history lesson.
That's
See,
right.
a lot of the pastors in the Methodist Church, and I'm going to give away a little secret, they have a lectionary that rotates out every 3 years.
Presbyterians do too.
Well, a lot of people don't know that there's a lectionary that has all the stuff written down.
Yeah.
And I mean, it gives you verses of Psalter, all like Old Testament, New Testament, what music to
Yeah,
play.
I've seen it, yeah.
Well, they added a new section to it 2 years ago, but nobody ever uses it.
What is it?
Contemporary or modern.
I just think the church needs to figure out, what does my congregation... Here I am, 73 years old. I sit in church and I think, well, we're getting ready in October to have an 8th grandchild. I sit in church one day and I thought, when he's 30, I'll be dead.
I mean, if you think
Now,
about
somebody
it,
my age,
Yeah.
my needs are far different from the 25-year-old.
That's
In
right.
30 years, they'll just be 55.
Well, and I think there's to that extent, there's a massive correction coming in my lifetime. If I make it to say 80, there's a massive shrinkage in the church, the institutional church. It's gonna happen, and it's probably gonna happen in the next 15 years.
Right.
Or we're gonna meet people where they are, or they're gonna realize they need God.
What would happen to our congregation if everybody 65 or older walked out?
Well, they're gonna walk out, if only because they're gonna cross the rocky shores. At
I'm
some
saying,
point,
what would happen?
well, here's
It'd be a
the thing.
handful.
We would shrink.
Yeah.
And that's probably coming if we don't meet the church or the people of God.
That's
where
why
they are.
Brian and I work so hard with the young people, the youth.
Absolutely.
You can work with them. They'll graduate. They go off.
That's right.
You hope you've given them what they need.
That's right.
It's just like I laugh and say about my own children. If you raise them right,
Yeah.
they'll leave,
Yeah.
but they will come back and bring more
And
with them.
I don't mean to sound so super prophetic or whatever, but like this is the presenting issue of my generation. That if you're 45 years old, by the time you're 65 and maybe retiring, that there may not be a church. So we've got to figure out how to make it. how to make it not necessarily relevant, because that sounds like you're compromising what truth and grace are. But there's got to be a place to meet people where they are. And I don't, and it, it's part of it's music style, part of it's small groups, part of it's getting into the streets.
I was going to say evangelism is one of the spots that we hurt the most on.
Yes. And
People don't understand what evangelism is.
Because we've been burned by evangelists. I mean,
that's right.
I am the world's worst.
The soapbox
We got
preacher.
burned by the government too, but we still listen to the government.
I don't.
You still pay taxes to them.
I just pay them enough to keep off my back.
But you still pay taxes to them.
Well, I have to. I don't want to go to jail.
Well, the same thing with religion.
If we break down this hierarchical problem, like if people, the people are still out there. They're on the ball fields. They're if they can't afford that because that's expensive. They're sitting in their houses on cell phones.
That's right.
They're there. They're at schools. They're out on the streets.
Well, I
see them at the gas station.
I was wearing our Edenton First Youth shirt. Me and Joe both were. Just going to Urban Air yesterday. You know how many people stopped and looked at my shirt and actually made me stop to see what my shirt said?
Because they didn't know, or because they...
And then when they saw the church, they were like, cool.
We were at Chick-fil-A, and this gentleman, it was very nice Chick-fil-A. This gentleman just came up and, y'all brought this whole crowd as your church, and just was really nice, and gave him extra drinks and things. And he said, I admire what you do. And he was older than me.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing. Even evangelism's not always going out there and pounding people over the head with the Bible. Sometimes it's getting out in the community and showing, okay, look, this is what we're doing. We're investing time in these kids. We're investing time in young adults. We're investing time in our elderly that are not able to come in. We're investing time and part of ourselves as well as giving God's grace.
Well, doesn't the Bible say actions speak louder than words? You have faith.
Show me the fruit.
Faith and works go together.
Well, even John Wesley said we learn better by experiences.
Yeah.
Isn't that one of his quadrilateral?
Yes. Well, it's not his quadrilateral, but
the
he
quadrilateral.
Talked about, he did actually talk about it.
I mean, that to me, that your actions speak lots louder than any words that come, because we've become a generation that we don't believe what you say. Well, because we've been lied to so much.
I would say that we became a disposal-based world. We were talking sort of before we have a podcast before the podcast, but our podcast before the podcast, we were speaking about pastors who sort of have their own agenda, their own sort of ambition. They go and do things to get where they want to go, and it's really sick. But this is age old. I mean, Jesus was getting after some of those guys who were sort of posturing themselves. However,
well, look at Judas.
Well, sure. I mean, John Wesley's dad tried to posture. It was a massive failure. His dad was a pastor, an Anglican priest. Massive failure. Posturing, trying to find himself with position. But this positional malarkey continues to happen in the institution, and no one really wants anything to do with that don't have that kind of title. So in some sense, I can appreciate that there are people who love God who want nothing to do with an institution they don't trust.
Case in point, Bible school. We had a wide mixture of young people, children, which I was thrilled with.
Sure.
We had African American, we had
a few
Latino, a few Hispanic.
You had a couple of special needs kids.
Special needs kids. It was just great.
Sure.
So I was running around there doing something, and this little African American boy came up to me, pulled on my shirt, said, "Mr. Joe." I said, "What, son?" He said, "I just want to thank you for feeding us."
Yeah.
David, I almost cried.
Yeah.
I mean, this kid.
That's right.
And he looked at me and said, "Can I do anything for you? Can I go get you? You've waited on us. We need to."
That's right.
I thought, that's not a sermon right there.
If kids understand what servanthood is.
And if we're smart, we may just need to say that maybe we don't get maybe the Generation X folks aren't going to come back in, but maybe we can catch their kids.
Well, Brian and I made a comment when our membership, we're dealing with who we've got.
That's right.
I would love to have more, but you know what?
That's right.
I'm not going to sit there and not service the ones I've got.
Right. That's right. And this church, if you go back historically, this church has probably served about the same amount of people we're serving now. There's a capacity that this church has. And I would bet you that we had in the late 90s, 2000s, there was large sort of balloon of moment. But like I would bet you, if you go back in time for the last 200 years, this church has probably, we're almost 200 years, if you can believe it. We're what, 5 years away from 200 years, which we need to celebrate 5 years
Good
from now. Isn't that wild? Bicentennial.
Oh, my word.
This church will have it. We gotta create a plate for the bicentennial, right? You gotta have a memorial. You gotta have a memorial plate.
No, Methodists gonna put plates on everything. There's little plaques.
Every church I've been to has memorial plates. We gotta have a plate. And I don't know why, but they love those. I think that we are probably ministering at the same capacity we've probably done for a long time. This is who we are. I mean, this is the garden God has given us. I'm not saying we shouldn't grow. We should expand if God grows us, but only God can get the growth.
That's right.
I mean, ultimately, if we're true to God and we honest and we're steady and we love people, and including those children, especially those children who who would otherwise never come to church, then we're doing our job.
That little boy may not ever grace another majority white church.
I know who he is, and he probably will.
But if he doesn't, I thought at least we've taught him that there are people that, regardless of their skin color, love him.
That's right.
Well, I look back at what Jesus told Peter when he jumped naked into the water and swam to the shore with all, after they caught the fish.
Yeah.
Feed my sheep.
Told him 3 times.
Well, the third time he told him tend his
said,
flock.
Feed my sheep, tend my flock, feed my sheep.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean that's, and I know that was more towards like apostles and ministers, but we're all ministers in the church.
Yeah.
Just because David has a title or I have a title doesn't mean jack squat.
It really shouldn't.
We are all ministers of Christ.
Well, we are the feet and the hands and the voice of Christ.
Yeah. I think that the pastor's role is in part local theologian. I think it's good for the church, for pastors to bring right doctrine, and maybe that's the problem with ministers right now, is that we've all got such scrambled egg doctrines that as a collective group, we've created confusion in our churches.
If you look at some of the stuff they're doing at some of these like seminaries, and I'm not calling any names, but there's some that they go way overboard. I mean, you don't call God a queer one.
Well, there's a desperation, I think, amongst seminaries, especially in the Methodist movement, because they are the sort of the prophetics. They're the eyes. They're supposed to be the experts, but they've seen a church dwindle massively in the last 30 years.
So what they're doing is they're reaching out to this segment of the population.
Right. So it's kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them. I think there's a lack of faith that we have offered by not trusting God in the process.
I'm no historian, but if you look back, when was religion so important to our ancestors? Well, here in the South, the war between the states, when you lost everything you had, had no idea how you were going to make it. Now, we wanted justice to both black and whites. Mm-hmm. Then we go to the Great Depression. I cannot imagine looking at my family thinking, what am I going to give you to eat? Not, are we going to have roast beef or what? What are we going to eat?
We have to move.
Number 3, World War I, World War II, and then 9/11. And I'm telling you, I think God uses that to wake us up.
That's right.
And I think, is he going to use, I don't know if I live to see it or not, but when you are so frightened, what is this generation going to have to fall back on?
Yes. Well, we've talked about food shortages happening because of rising fuel costs, and it takes fuel to make fertilizer, and so a lot of farms have slacked off of the fertilizer, which means less produce.
They can't afford it.
And then there's transportation of the produce, so a lot of it's dying on the vine. There's going to be many are saying there's going to be food shortages in August onward. Your stomach will guide you in many ways. I mean, when we are in a place where it's either violence or work together to be the hands and feet of Christ. I mean, the church is supposed to be we're supposed to feed. Ultimately, we're a table faith. So I think that the next big thing is literally a day or two away. I mean, like it might be next month, it might be September. But the church we're going to have an opportunity to respond together.
You told me the crop issues. That actually resonates on to one of my teachers that I had in school. He lives in Fitzgerald now, and down there it's watermelons. They grow a lot of watermelons in Fitzgerald. Well, this guy had 14 fields of watermelons. He was only able to pick 4.
He didn't have pickers.
Well, not only that, if you can't sell them,
I pick them.
why pick them?
Well, Sarah goes and buys a watermelon a week, and it was like $7 a watermelon
Right.
now.
You
But
can have
see,
my watermelons.
He wasn't able to get them shipped. He couldn't get,
Because it costs too much to transport.
diesel fuel was.
So you could just go down there and cut them and take them off. Put them in the
He
truck.
opened the field and said, "Look, instead of letting them rot,
Go get them.
come get what you want."
Yeah.
And he had people from like 4 different counties that they came over and cleaned out 2 of the fields.
Well, now that's great, but how is he going to pay his bills?
Yeah.
But his thing was God told him, you can't do anything with them. Don't let them go to rot.
Yeah, at least let somebody have them.
Do what you
Oh,
can.
I agree with him 1,000%.
Yeah. Pickle the rinds. I think that I think at the end of this we've got to. Somehow the fact that we're on the verge of. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that the economy is like the stock market's dropping off a cliff.
It's tanking.
The last couple of weeks. Yesterday, I think it was 800 points.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my word.
I mean, and I'm not paying attention too much to it because I'm not retiring anytime soon. But that said, like $88,000 Grand Wagoneer, we talked about that just before we got on here. There's people driving $88,000 Grand Wagoneers. Watermelon's not getting where they can. People can't put food. People can't plant because they can't afford the fertilizer. And there's not people to pick the plants anyway, so the ones that do grow are rotting on the vines. There's a massive crisis in front of us.
Try eggs, almost $5 a dozen.
Under 50 folks, especially under 50 folks that don't have a steady job, are going to absolutely need to. They're going to turn to God. And are we, the church, going to be the hands and feet that proclaim God and become a handout?
I was going to say, are we going to actually be there for them and get behind them, or are we going to help them one time and say, you're on your own after that?
And well, that's right. And then the other thing is, there's the it's kind of the Marie Antoinette.
Let them eat cake.
The courtesans, saying, well, we've got money. What's wrong with those people? Are we going to be the church, or are we going to find ourselves sort of, well, we're a first church, and they're a country church, and they're a black church, and they're no, it's one church. Are we going to have the courage, the moral courage, to realize that we're a part of one church, and we need no matter what your pronouns or my pronouns are, or what your identity or my identity. No, our identity is in Christ.
Right.
All right. It's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock. We've talked for, 40 minutes?
42 minutes.
All right, that's good. Next week, we're going to say goodbye to Brian, and that's kind of sad, but he's going to Rutledge, and we're excited for him.
New adventure.
And so we have our work ahead of us. You have your work ahead of you. Let us be disciple makers that make disciples who make disciples, because it's God's church, and we are called to the fields. God says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So you few workers who are out there, go and do the work of Christ, and be blessed this week.